Did you ever realize Fallout lets you read all about its old world? I'm Mark from Digital Dissection, and today I'll be your guide to the stories hidden within Fallout's newspapers. Many of you may not care about newspapers, but they will always hold a special place in my heart. No, not because I still read them in real life today, but because I actually used to write for one many years ago. That's why whenever I saw them on Fallout's loading screens, I'd try to read them as long as they were there. These pre-war newspapers held unique perspectives and a peek into the extensive past of the franchise, so long as you were willing to explore them. Does it make me somewhat of a boomer to sit down and read a fictional newspaper from a fictional universe? Kind of. Don't judge me. The good news is I read these articles so that you don't have to, and the information hidden provides an interesting look into Fallout's world that we don't get to typically see much of. Starting with Fallout 3, an interest in printed media caused me to make my way to the Capitol Post building, once I found out it existed, which for many this can be an overlooked location simply due to where it is. Held within the L'Enfant Plaza, the former headquarters for the area's printed news still stands despite so much of the surrounding area being leveled. In terms of the overall plot of Fallout 3, you won't find much of an excuse to actually come here, but the area's lootable goods include a difficult-to-see safe, as well as the body of Gibson in the building's printer room, who has ties to the minefield location. Not much is actually known about Gibson, but he holds the key to the locked Gibson house located in the former neighborhood. For some reason he's also had his head ripped off, and we're not quite sure why, but as strange as that information might seem, that's not why we're here. We need those sweet, sweet news articles. The Capitol Post's second floor is no longer accessible, but its first floor holds information on some of the printed stories that span roughly 25 years of the newspaper's history, beginning with top stories found on 3 computer terminals that survived the Great War. The work of 2 of its staff writers can be found here, which include Dorothy Proud and Walter Street Beat Monroe. The earliest top stories can be found from July 27, 2052, which Dorothy Proud details in her article titled United Nations Disbanded, a story that many of you likely saw on the game's loading screens. The full article includes a direct quote from the UN's President Sakugama Kiri, which reads, "In a somber press conference at the United Nations building in New York City, United Nations President Sakugama Kiri had this to say, 'It is a sad day for the United States, sadder still for the world. An era of relative peace and prosperity has come to a tragic end. The resources wars are upon us, and in my humble opinion, the United Nations is needed now more than ever. Sadly, the world disagrees.'" The moment is an important one in the Fallout universe, as it's only a few months after Europe and the Middle East went to war in April that same year. Comically, the UN headquarters was required to be vacated by all nations as part of this story, with toy retailer Bumbelows being the top candidate for the now empty space. We're guessing Bumbelows must be similar to Spirit of Halloween in this universe. Separately, another story on this terminal includes the Pint-Sized Slasher, a true crime event in the Fallout universe we've actually covered multiple times on this channel. The article written by Walter Monroe called Pint-Sized Slasher, More Than Myth, details the horrific events of an adolescent murderer donning a clown mask. The mysterious suburban assailant achieved a level of near-mythical status amongst the DC area, stalking and stabbing multiple people. By July of 2052, however, the killer became a piece of local folklore, and Germantown's police chief Joseph Field reminded the general public that not only was the slasher real, they confirmed through forensics that the slasher was indeed a child. After reviewing the autopsy results of the Linden Street slayings, we have confirmed that the force and direction of every knife wound are consistent with an attack from a much smaller assailant, a child to be precise. In addition, a surviving victim of the slasher, named Christopher Atkinson, detailed the harrowing events of the killer. "The clown! The clown! He's going to kill us all! Do you understand me? He stabbed my brother Sean right in the face! He killed my brother! The little clown!" The slasher would go on to become a popular Halloween costume, as well as an Easter egg hidden within the Vault 112 Tranquility Lane simulation. The article, however, proves to be the strongest evidence for the Pint-Sized Slasher in the franchise, whose mask appears in the Point Lookout DLC and the full costume in Fallout 76. While we're sure the work of Walter Monroe and Dorothy Proud was far more extensive than just a few articles, the next stories we still have evidence of them covering includes top stories from June 3rd, 2072. This includes several more interesting developments during the Sino-American War that began in 2066. In reviewing Walter Monroe's articles, he tends to get juicier stories than his fellow staff writer, this time confirming the existence of Liberty Prime in an article titled Development of Superweapon Confirmed, after it was announced by General Constantine Chase. At this point in time, however, Chase did not give the exact explanation on the specific name, Liberty Prime. What Monroe quotes directly is Chase teasing what the superweapon eventually would be.
All in due time, all in due time. Rest assured, when this weapon is complete, liberty will come to Anchorage, and hell will follow.
Separately, Dorothy Proud also covers an emerging story found within Fallout 3's loading screens under her report, U.S. to Annex Canada, which is the U.S. officially absorbing its North American neighbor. Proud goes on to detail in her top story that tensions with Canada during the Sino-American War continued to escalate in the years since the war began, and the declaration to annex Canadian territories followed deliberate actions by Canadian protesters to sabotage the valuable Alaskan oil pipeline. The complete takeover of Canada's resources, of course, was a major point of contention between the two nations. What I've always found interesting about this is that Proud writes these articles without any particular slant towards supporting the provocative actions by the U.S. government. While that tone is pretty consistent in her first two articles here, her final one on January 11, 2077, titled Commies Crushed, Alaska Liberated, provides a much more significant contrast. Proud's writing style shifts considerably in the days following the United States victory during the liberation of Anchorage, Alaska from Chinese occupation. Her coverage of the January 10th military offensive against communist invaders is told in a way that almost rivals that of World War II-era promotional films of United States soldiers, which in some ways can feel poetic, but equally conveys a sense of nationalism.
No red-blooded American can ever forget that terrible winter of 2066, when Chairman Chiang's commie cutthroats mercilessly invaded the icy extension of the United States, in an unprecedented act of foreign aggression that sent shockwaves all the way back to our nation's capital. But the nightmare is finally over, and America, always home of the brave, is once again the land of the free.
Perhaps Proud found a different writing style in the 10 years since the Sino-American War began, or potentially her editors required her to present the information in a way that the staff writer herself didn't quite always capture. What's consistent, however, is that across the time that we see her content, the titles of her articles always ended in an exclamation mark. The final article we can read, however, paints a slightly different picture of what the world was like during the days leading up to Fallout's Great War, courtesy of Walter Monroe. The Street Beat writer shed light on a story that was brewing back on the home front, specifically under the title, Food Riots Rile Feds. In it, Monroe details the rather ingenuine comments from White House spokesman Warren Eccleston, who is completely out of touch with the challenges of everyday U.S. citizens.
Okay, Americans are hungry, we get it. Well, I've got news for you. Things are tough all over, people. The president himself has been forced to substitute cube steak for his nightly prime rib. And the only wine available is a detestable Chateau Montrose 2043. But does he whine? Does he take to the streets like a rabid red? So please, good people, please, wait in line, get your food, and then go home. We're Americans. We do not solve our problems with violence.
The complete lack of empathy from White House officials is, of course, equally repulsive and somewhat humorous, given how ridiculously obtuse it is. What's significant about the riots, however, is that it's not unique to the Washington, D.C. area, but actually provides us a link directly to another pre-war publication, one that resides in the Boston Commonwealth by the name of the Boston Bugle. Similar to the Capitol Post, Fallout 4's Boston Bugle immediately drew my interest, because different vantage points can create entirely different recollections of events, and Boston's journalists just might hold the key to joining narratives across games. Not only did it do this between Fallout 3 and 4, but also shed light on a mystery from the franchise's first game, compared to its DC counterpart, which admittedly we don't know a lot about beyond its location and remaining articles. The Bugle was founded about 50 years before Fallout's Great War, sometime around the area of 2027. The publication features the work of Buster Connolly, Mags Veccio, and Tim Stahl, who wrote award-winning columns for the newspaper. Upon entering the building, you'll find a similar level of inaccessibility, much like the Washington, D.C. newspaper. The center of the building collapsed in on itself from where you can visit initially, but fortunately an active terminal sits in this space that was saved from the destruction, and it's here we can peek into the minds of the Bugle staff writers. This lonely terminal covers the front page from October 19th to October 23, 2077, mere moments before the bombs fell. I was drawn immediately to the work of Buster Connolly, who provided one of the connections that I wanted to find between Fallout 4 and its predecessor. What Connolly covers in his column titled "Boston Food Riots Continue" is the very real national problem of food shortages during Fallout's ongoing war with China. What I'm willing to assume in connecting the articles of Connolly and the Capitol Post's Walter Monroe is that the food riots weren't isolated incidents, ones that impacted the most populated areas of the United States. Connolly's coverage of the Boston food riots, however, is much less humorous, detailing how 4 people lost their lives during the event in the Commonwealth.
In what can only be described as a scene of absolute pandemonium, on Friday afternoon, soldiers of the United States Army's 184th Infantry Regiment opened fire on a group of unarmed civilians after an unknown person smashed the plate glass window of the Roxbury Food Bank, prompting several people in line outside to storm into the establishment. As of yesterday evening, at least 4 people were confirmed dead and 8 others injured. But Jonathan Corman, spokesman for the Army, insists the troops acted within their authority.
The Boston Bugle writer goes on to detail that the events that transpired at the Roxbury Food Bank have happened multiple times across the era of the resource wars, and the separation of government perspectives and everyday civilians were at odds virtually the entire time. The Army spokesman seems to mirror statements made by White House spokesman Warren Eccleston, but eyewitness and 85-year-old grandmother Hannah Henry spoke far differently of the day's violence.
They were laughing, joking about who they were going to shoot first. Those soldiers may not have fired on the crowd before that window got broke, but they were looking forward to it all the same.
What was always my takeaway from this article was that fiction can oftentimes be far too real, as similar events occurred from 1929 to 1941 during the United States Great Depression, and Fallout's own world might be able to create futuristic technologies, but it could never escape the realities of inflation, material scarcity, and, well, the violence that its universe is all too well known for. Another takeaway from the work of Buster Connolly is that it might seem odd that a staff writer would cover such a heavy-handed topic, but then also be covering sports in the same window. Connolly's coverage during the article "Boston Headed for First World Series Win Since 1918" is quite the contrast in subject matter. Compared to the heavy-handed nature of the food riots, Boston's Major League Baseball curse didn't seem to be rectified in Fallout's universe. The area's faithful fans have been suffering for an incredible 159 years. That is, until taking a 3-game lead in the 2077 World Series, as Connolly goes on to detail.
Yes, for years, the concession stands of Boston have fed baseball fans a steady diet of beer, hot dogs, peanuts, and bitter defeat. But on Saturday, October 23, 2077, the only thing that could snatch away victory is an act of God, or some obscene calamity of man. Tomorrow, my friends, the unthinkable will finally come to pass, and life in Boston will never be the same again.
Sadly, Boston's World Series finale would indeed be interrupted by this so-called calamity of man, as the old world would end before a champion was decided. What's interesting about Connolly's work is that it does allow for the reader to see both a technically written news piece compared to a more personal and possibly opinion-based story. Of course, the Boston Bugle isn't just home to one writer, and Mags Veccio owns more space on the remaining terminal left in this building. Veccio's range in column topics is actually one of her more interesting points, as she tackles local stories, world opinions, and even hard-hitting breaking news. One of Veccio's most easily recognizable stories is one that appears on remaining copies of the Boston Bugle itself found in the Commonwealth. It's called Case Closed on crime boss Eddie Winter. The story paints a noticeable picture capturing the shock felt by Boston citizens, as the police department ceases all investigations of noted crime boss Eddie Winter. The disbelief in her writing, however, hides several important pieces of information. That Winter had been involved in almost every crime imaginable, but that he was also the most likely suspect in the death of Jennifer Lands, fiancée to Nick Valentine, who was lead detective at the time, and directly involved in the official investigation codenamed Operation Winter's End. She'd also note Winter's mysterious disappearance shortly thereafter, where he'd go into hiding after undergoing ghoulification to survive the Great War. While this article was far more technical in nature, Veccio's next work, titled China Showdown: The Atomic Ultimatum, provided commentary on the horrific cost of war against the United States' mortal foe. Her comments are offered as a retrospective of sorts, describing the growing human cost of a decade-long war, which in many ways didn't exactly make sense the longer it was fought. Veccio points out that truly all we could do was look at the numbers and how they continued to climb each and every day, whether it be a casualty or a dollar, both counting towards a purpose that likely ends with one inevitability.
In the minds of the world's great leaders, those billions of dollars haven't merely been spent, they've been wasted. Because here we are, after more than a decade of constant warfare, with no clear end, and no clear winner in sight. So really at this point, what other options do these superpowers have, if not the nuclear one? And therein, of course, lies the rub. For when China or the United States launches its nuclear missiles and drops its atomic bombs, there will be no one left to count the casualties, let alone the ordnance. No one left to declare victory.
Veccio's words here mark an important commentary on the seemingly endless war that's ominous in the days literally before the old world ended. What's important to point out here, though, is that she already had written an article that more closely connected dots of Fallout's universe. She'd actually go on to detail the existence of the Enclave in her work titled, "White House Remains Empty, Where's Our President?" Not only did Veccio make references to Fallout 3's Raven Rock, but she points out how the White House has been vacant for nearly a year's time, and correctly posits that the last standing U.S. president had evacuated for the Poseidon Energy oil rig, which longtime fans will know by the name Control Station Enclave.
The Boston Bugle has learned that the official designation of the oil rig is actually Control Station Enclave, giving credence to the long-running rumors of a secret, militarized shadow government, known as the Enclave, that would take control of the United States in the event of a nuclear conflagration. And so the mystery of the missing president has finally been solved. But in doing so, has the Boston Bugle also uncovered evidence that the end of the world, in the form of total atomic war, is also at hand? Sadly, the president's silence seems to speak volumes.
So what investigative journalism led Veccio to correctly call the final days of the U.S. government? What's interesting about it is that this article dropping in the weeks before the bombs falling is as close to the pin as anyone could have gotten. We're guessing her sources had to have been pretty good. Otherwise, it's unlikely her editorial team would have ever let it be printed. What's fun about the Boston Bugle, however, is that it does feel like a graduation of sorts for Bethesda's writers, as the references and tie-ins to its main narratives, side quests, and past are all on display. That is, so long as you care to venture here. The Charleston Herald in Fallout 76 is a fun addition to the franchise, and while it may not be the most well-known of Fallout's news publications, it's one with several standout stories. In total, the Herald has 18 articles to peruse, created by a team of 7 writers and editors who tracked everything from local conspiracies to espionage and even some national events. One of my favorite articles from this team is courtesy of Luke Hogan, a reporter who covered a shootout at the Ultralux Casino in Las Vegas. Fans of New Vegas will remember the home of the White Glove Society, but long before their time on July 14, 2072, a shootout there cost 5 people their lives and injured over a dozen more, detailed in a story called 5 Slain in Mob Shootout at the Ultralux.
In a dramatic scene on Wednesday night, police stormed the Ultralux Casino in Las Vegas and engaged in a protracted battle with mobsters. Hundreds of bullets were fired, all mobsters were slain, and 17 bystanders were injured. Interviews with eyewitnesses indicate complete chaos and contradictory stories. Some witnesses report the mobsters tried to surrender twice. One eyewitness claims the firefight started with a sniper round, killing one of the mobsters. A cashier claimed the mobsters were winning until soldiers arrived and used a missile launcher to blow 2 of them up. The chief of police claimed that this was a major victory. It's time for us to send a clear message that no one in Las Vegas is above the law.
The story is a fun tie-in to the world of Fallout New Vegas, to be sure, but a taste of the kind of content the Herald had already become known for. Another interesting example includes writer Eleanor Tarkin's A Month of Madness, which was followed by an editorial printed on March 17, 2061, involving the area's Allegheny Asylum. The facility was investigated by Tarkin as a fake patient, who intended to stay at the asylum to report on it from the inside. The highly risky assignment uncovered widespread abuse and care of its patients, which included many who had no mental illness at all, and were misdiagnosed on purpose to be institutionalized. The difficulty in earning release from Allegheny caused Eleanor to stay for a full month, where she was originally only supposed to be there for about 10 days, and this was despite repeated attempts to be released. This process further exposed the lengthy and expensive practices that prevented its patients from gaining their freedom back. And once Tarkin was able to leave, her findings caused a full-scale investigation by local and government officials. The asylum itself would close, but the Herald would release an ominous statement regarding the Allegheny's administrative team.
I think the real threat to this region are the folks who ran that facility, and yet we see them escaping without stigma. They're a resume away from joining your workforce, an application away from becoming part of your community. Those are the real madmen run amok.
Even with eye-catching articles such as these, the Herald's presence in the mining industry within the region can't be understated, as they popularly covered the arrival of Atomic Mining Services, or AMS, and their usage of detonating atomic charges to dig deeper into mines than ever before. This includes AMS's aggressive acquisition of the town of Welch and escorting reporters out of the area with armed men when they asked questions. This coverage would further extend to AMS's involvement between mining rivals Hornwright Industrial and Garahan Mining. The Herald's article of the event on October 18, 2077, directly referenced in Man vs. Machine, points out a 24-hour mining exercise that could prove whether Hornwright's auto-miner robots or Garahan's man-piloted excavator power armor were superior in the future of mining technology. We can only imagine the destruction caused in the world's environment if not for the bombs dropping literally a week later. The topic of automating West Virginia's mining efforts, however, became a central focus for reporter Quinn Carter, who famously reported on the actions of Senator Sam Blackwell. The public official earned a reputation amongst the mining riots, worker strikes against automation, and offering open support to the area's Appalachian Free States movement, an organization of local survivalists who sought to separate from the local government. As these separatists and local police fought each other over time, eventually Blackwell would disappear entirely from the public eye. This was covered by the Herald after a search party for Blackwell and his family completely vanished. That is until reporter Quinn Carter received an unmarked letter to interview Blackwell directly. The controversial interview would lay out the nefarious and provocative actions of what wasn't yet known as the Enclave, but proved to be an ominous warning to its readers. The secret interview saw Blackwell expose the U.S. executive branch, the Department of Agriculture, and major corporations, all liable in a shadow conspiracy that Blackwell believed treated the American people as pawns in their sick games. In the interview, the senator's advice was simple: flee the largest population centers, head into the wilderness, and hopefully escape the gaze of the government secretly plotting against everyone. Blackwell officially treated the interview as his resignation from the United States Senate. The interview, however, caused the Herald an immense amount of public turmoil, with many calling for the employment of Quinn Carter herself in reporting what felt like unconfirmed conspiracy theories. The Charleston Herald editorial board released a statement supporting Quinn's reporting and her continued employment with the publication. Quinn would actually continue to report for the Herald post-war, covering more missing politicians in the wake of the devastation, but this also includes the emergence of ghouls, as well as the widely reported sightings of the Mothman, which proved that the Herald was dedicated to its mission statement the entire time: to report the truth and only the truth, reporting on both the news-breaking and mundane stories across Appalachia. So overall, each newspaper within Fallout 3, 4, and 76 takes on a different identity of its own. The Capitol Post and Boston Bugle feel far more like the concept of a nationally recognized publication, while the Charleston Herald accurately captures that of a locally bred and operated seemingly grassroots effort. While I'm not here to necessarily rank them based on their effectiveness, I will say that I enjoyed stopping to read all of them in my travels across the unique wastelands they were all formerly a part of. If you've never stopped to explore the secrets of its fictional staff writers, you're definitely missing out on contextual information that helps add considerable color to the margins of Fallout's world. And at best, it's only a few minutes that interrupts the loot goblin tendencies of many RPG players. As a parting note, Bethesda games are always known for works such as these, so it likely isn't a surprise to many of you that these exist at all. However, the next time you think about scrapping a newspaper as a junk item, think about visiting the locations they came from. You just might find a reference you weren't expecting. And with that, we explored the various newspapers of Fallout's world. Were there any hard-hitting stories that we missed? Let us know in the comments. If you liked this video, consider subscribing to this channel for more weekly Fallout content, where we share several videos detailing stories from the rich lore of the series. And as always, Wastelanders, keep on dissecting. Thanks for watching. This is Mark signing off.